Hi everyone, my name is Grace, and in today's video I'm going to be talking to you about my philosophy paper topic, which was on embryonic stem cell research and cloning as an ethical dilemma. This video will be broken up into parts because I cannot talk for like 10 minutes at a time, and I tend to get really out of breath. So yeah, just letting you know. And then also I have a PowerPoint presentation attached to my discussion board post, so if you guys want to look at that and kind of follow along, you can. So stem cells can be defined as blank cells, and what this means is that they're ones that have not yet been differentiated into various parts of the body. So they kind of live in a sort of adolescent state, and they stay there until they later transition into a specific cell type. So the best way I can kind of explain this to you guys is that as a red blood cell carries oxygen throughout the body, and that's kind of its only job or its only function, a stem cell does not do that. A stem cell doesn't have a specific function yet, and yeah, it later will. Now, stem cells can divide as all regular cells can, and there are actually 3 different types, which I will talk to you about a little bit later in the video. So, I wanted to talk to you guys about the history of stem cells, just because I think it's interesting, and it's also kind of important to my paper topic, because stem cell research in stem cells has kind of come a really long way, and now we have technology that can pose, it's a question of ethics. So I think that's kind of important. But yeah, so in 1963 there were 2 Canadian scientists, Ernest McCulloch, I think that's how you say his name, and James Till, and they performed experiments on the bone marrow of mice. They ended up finding out that red blood cells form a special class of cells, and this was important because it kind of told them and, researchers that cells have specific jobs and specific functions, and they just didn't know how that happened or where they came from. And now we know that they came from stem cells originally, but yeah, so that's kind of important. Now, prior to this, scientists did use the term stem cells, but they used it to describe the kind of differentiation of cells. They knew that one cell would give rise to many. And yeah, it wasn't until actually 1981 that American scientists Martin Evans and Gail Martin were able to derive pluripotent stem cells from the embryos of mice. And this was really a pivotal moment for science in general, because these were the first embryonic stem cells ever isolated. So yeah, that is the history of stem cells so far. So as I mentioned in the earlier part of the video, there are 3 types of stem cells, and the first one are adult stem cells, also known as non-embryonic stem cells. So these stem cells come from already developed tissues and organs in the body, and they are used to repair and replace damaged tissues. So for example, if you got maybe like a burn or a scrape or a cut or something like that on your hand, these stem cells would kind of be on the forefront, bandaging that wound up. So yeah, and I also wanted to make it clear that these stem cells are multipotent. And so what that means is they can give rise to multiple cell types in the human body, but not all cell types. And so that's something that's very important to to my paper. So let's see, next we have embryonic stem cells. These are the ones that I mainly focused on in my essay, and these come from human embryos that are 3 to 5 days old, and they are derived from in vitro fertilization or IVF. So for those of you who don't know what IVF is, if a couple cannot become pregnant, naturally, they can opt to do IVF, and they will typically take about 15 eggs from the woman and fertilize them in a petri dish in a laboratory. So they take so many eggs because it increases the chance that, some of those fertilized eggs will survive. And so, yeah, that's pretty important. You want to have a child, so you're going to obviously take as many eggs as you can and try to make that work out. But what this means is it leaves a lot of, leftover fertilized eggs, and that's where we get embryonic stem cells from. We use those for research from donors. So yeah. It's also important to note here that embryonic stem cells are pluripotent, and so what this means is that these stem cells can give rise to virtually any type of cell in the human body. So they're not limited in the type of cell that they can become. Oh God, I have like a cough. Anyway, so the last type of stem cells are induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPSCs, and this one is kind of hard to explain, but they are pretty much adult stem cells that have been genetically reprogrammed back to their embryonic state. So these stem cells are pluripotent, and pretty much researchers and scientists use specific transcription factors or genes to reprogram back to the embryonic state of the cell. So yeah, that's the 3 types. Okay, so moving on to my thesis and my claim, after I did a bunch of research on embryonic stem cell research itself, I ultimately came to the conclusion that it was both ethical and beneficial. And there's 3 main reasons for this, and one of them is for its potential to better understand cellular processes in the human body. The second one is for its potential use in drug toxicity screening, and then lastly, and perhaps the most important one of all, is for its potential ability to cure disease using cell transplantation therapy. And so I'll get more into these a little bit later in the video, but these are the reasons why I believe it's both ethical and beneficial to use. So moving on to the reasons why many people do not believe human embryonic stem cell research is ethical, is because a lot of people relate it back to abortion. So people think that using human embryos to do research is inherently unethical, that it's killing human life, and a lot of this claim is based off religious principle. Now, the second claim is the slippery slope claim, and this one is a little bit more complex because it's kind of based out of fear of future technology and what we could do with it. But so pretty much a lot of people think that if we justify using human embryonic stem cell research now, that in the future it would also be justified to kind of use human subjects and do harmful experiments on them. So, this fear, I could understand why it would be justified, because the technology that we do have is amazing and also frightening at the same time. We have the potential ability to clone entire human beings, and we have actually also already cloned an entire animal. So in the UK in 1996, there was actually a sheep that was cloned named Dolly, and Dolly is now dead, unfortunately, but we were able to clone her, and so a lot of people are kind of frightened by this. They're scared that there's no limit to this research, that it can just continue to improve and progress and go further past, any ethical boundaries whatsoever. So, yeah, that is kind of the claims against human embryonic stem cell research. All right, so now I'm going to talk about reasons why I believe it's both ethical and beneficial to conduct human embryonic stem cell research. And one of the reasons I kind of talked about earlier in the video was that it could help us learn more about cellular processes. And this is important because while we do know a lot about the human body today, there's over like 37 trillion cells or something in an adult human, and there's still a lot that we don't know. So being able to learn about cellular processes and the development of cells is really incredible. So we could learn about genes, proteins, the way that they express themselves, precursors for disease hidden in DNA. We can learn about how environment impacts cell growth, and really so much more, because there's really no end to it. We could just learn so much about cells and about our bodies by being able to use stem cells in research. So now for the second reason as to why human embryonic stem cell research would be or is both ethical and beneficial is that it is extremely helpful in drug toxicity screening. We can learn about the ways in which drugs interact with the human body, both positively and negatively. And so this is something that's huge, and this would be major for pharmaceutical companies to be able to do this. We would also be able to limit or completely halt animal cruelty and animal testing by doing this, which is something that's major. I mean, we don't want to have to test on animals, but some people would argue that we need to test drugs on these animals in order to make sure that they're safe for humans. But, having the ability to conduct stem cell research and test drugs on these cells would really be very beneficial to us. Now, the third reason as to why conducting this research would be both both ethical and beneficial is for its potential ability to be able to cure all kinds of diseases by using cell transplantation therapy. So some of the diseases that we would be able to cure using this research includes cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, heart disease, diabetes, spinal cord injuries, AIDS, and so many more. We would have the ability to potentially cure all of these sick people using stem cell research by using cells that are not diseased and putting them in people's bodies who are sick. This is something that is amazing and something that could be super beneficial. It would stop a lot of people's suffering, both patients themselves and families, friends. The entire world would change if we could conduct this research. And so that's something that I think is, really important. But besides that, people who need transplants, organ transplants, they would also be be put in a better place if we could conduct this research, because they could potentially get brand new organs, kidneys, livers, what have you, and they would be able to take better. They would have a lesser chance of being rejected by the patient's body, and that would mean, one less surgery, a longer time for them to be able to live, a longer time for them to go in between having to get another transplant. So this is something that is very important, and this is probably one of the main reasons why I believe it's ethical and beneficial to conduct this research. Okay, so now for the last reason as to why it is both ethical and beneficial to use this research is that, in regards to the religious claim that doing research like this is like an abortion, it's killing a human life, to that I say maybe, but not really, because embryos that come from these in vitro fertilization clinics, they can sit around for years at a time until, a couple either decides to get pregnant again and have another child, or they decide to not, and in the case that they don't want to get pregnant again, they have to do something with those fertilized eggs. So the options that they have are to either discard of them, literally throw them out, donate them to science, to research like this, or to donate them to another family who cannot get pregnant. And so, in a situation like that, I think it definitely would be easier for a couple to donate their frozen embryos to science. And so that's something that's really important, because, it's going to help people, it's doing good, and, it's not really killing a human life, because it's being used for good, and it could potentially bring, something even more amazing to come. So that's kind of, what I got out of doing research based off of, a counterclaim for the whole religious opponent side of things. So, I'm sorry this video is getting super long. I promise it's almost over. I just had a lot to talk about and explain. So I wanted to talk about the politics of this, because politics definitely plays a big role in stem cell research. And actually, as of this year, in 2020, Donald Trump, our president, has implemented a new fetal policy. And what this would mean for research like this is less funding, a limit on funding, even sometimes no funding at all for institutions who do research and scientists who do research, and also a complete ban on using embryos that came from people who've had abortions. And so this is a major setback for research like this and science. Some scientists are even receiving death threats from pro-life activists, or being silenced by universities and institutions that have done this research in the past. But I think that with time, people will start to realize that this is something that should be taken advantage of, and that it would be a shame not to use this research for good. So yeah.